Her son toasted her retirement like it was a eulogy, then smiled as he took her seat at the table. Della Adler didn't push back. She passed the steak knife, paid the bill, and reclaimed controlling interest before dessert. By morning, her son and his wife would lose access to the company she built, the house they borrowed, and the legacy they tried to rebrand. She'd been their foundation for 23 years. Now she was the firewall. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The kind of silence that clung to Della's ribs wasn't quiet. It buzzed. Underneath the soft jazz and clinking cutlery of the oak room, the air felt staged. Every polished wine glass, every linen napkin, every smile around that $1,600 mahogany table was part of a play she hadn't auditioned for. She'd picked the restaurant. She'd made the reservation. She'd paid the bill, up front discreetly, because she still believed in dignity. Now she sat between her son and his wife, watching them hold court like they owned the damn table. Blake stood, glass in hand, face glowing with champagne polish. "Here's to modern leadership," he said, smile wide, and knowing when to pass the torch. A few cousins chuckled like it was the kind of line you'd frame in a home office. Della looked down at her filet mignon, medium rare, untouched. She traced a finger over the edge of her water glass, listening. Tamrin dabbed the corner of her mouth with a cloth napkin, leaned in just enough to be heard. "Not everyone needs to drive," she said lightly. "Some people thrive in the back seat." This time the laughter had more teeth. Uncle Doug let out a low whistle. Someone clapped. Della's fork clinked against her plate as she cut the steak without tasting it. Her smile stayed frozen, small, polite, unmoved. Botox would have cost less than this dinner. Gavin beside her shifted. He wasn't laughing. His brow furrowed just enough to register disapproval, but he said nothing. His loyalty was too tangled. His brother, his wife, his mother, all ropes pulling in opposite directions. Blake raised his glass higher. "We'll take it from here, Mom," he said, with that earnest son of a CEO grin. "Just enjoy being part of it." There it was, the final clause, the coded message. You've been voted off the island. She didn't drink. But God, she wanted to, if only to throw the glass. Instead, she lifted her own stemware, sparkling water, lemon wedge, and offered a toast that didn't reach her eyes. "To new beginnings," she said. The clink of crystal echoed, almost musical. Almost final. A waiter approached with the dessert menus. No one looked at it. Della waved him off, quiet but firm. Tamrin leaned into Blake, whispering something behind her manicured hand. Della caught the glance. She saw the way Tamrin's nails rested possessively on Blake's wrist, like she'd already claimed the family legacy, and Della was just a relic with a nice purse. "Everything okay?" Blake asked, cocking his head like he hadn't just gutted her in public with a toast. "I'm peachy," Della said. Her voice didn't waver. It never did. Years of boardroom poker faces had made sure of that. Across the table, Aunt Sandra started talking about a lake house renovation. Something about sunrooms and granite countertops. Della let the conversation blur into static. She stared at the dark wood grain of the table and imagined it splintering down the middle. For 23 years, she'd built everything these people were now casually dismantling. The business, the brand, the name. She'd sacrificed sleep, sanity, and entire Christmases to keep the company and the family afloat. And now they were feeding on it like guests at a wedding where she wasn't the bride or the mother, just the caterer. "Blake," she said softly, setting down her napkin. "May I speak to you? Alone." He looked surprised, almost nervous. "Sure," he said, glancing at Tamrin, then rising. They stepped away from the table and into a quiet hallway near the restrooms. The light was dimmer there, more honest. "I'm happy you feel ready to lead," Della said calmly. "But I want to be very clear. Being handed the wheel isn't the same as knowing how to drive." Blake opened his mouth, but she raised a finger. "You inherited a company that's solvent, respected, and nationally branded. You don't have the scars it took to build it. So before you decide on furniture, remember who paid for the damn floorboards?" His jaw tensed. "I'm not trying to erase you, Mom." "No," she said. "You're trying to replace me, subtly, with flair, with toasts and symbolism. And I'm telling you now, that torch you toasted, I still hold it. And you're not ready to carry it alone. She turned to leave, but paused. Oh, and Blake? Yeah? You'll need your own credit card next time. She left him standing in that hallway like a boy caught sneaking bourbon from his father's cabinet, angry, embarrassed, and just a little afraid. Back at the table, Gavin looked up as she returned. Everything okay? She sat, composed. Lovely chat, she said, sipping her water. Her hand trembled slightly, not with fear, with fury. The waiter returned. Dessert, anyone? Tamron smiled sweetly. Let's celebrate. Bring the soufflé. Della didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed ahead, calculating something far more dangerous than revenge. She was planning the resurrection. The smell of motor oil and old cedar greeted Della like an old friend. Noah's garage hadn't changed in 20 years, still cluttered with half-finished projects, and the kind of precision tools that suggested a man who didn't believe in shortcuts. A space built for fixing broken things, maybe even people. Della sat on the worn bench near the back, steam rising from the thermos he'd poured her coffee from. No French press, no oat milk, just black and hot. It tasted like grit and backbone. Noah stood a few feet away, flipping through the manila folder she'd handed him. He'd aged into a kind of rugged calm, graying at the temples, calloused hands, the same dry wit she remembered from the early investor meetings. Back then, he was the only one who told her the truth, even when it hurt. He stopped on the third page, eyes narrowing. You serious about this? She sipped. Does that read like a woman who's bluffing? He turned the page, then another. Finally, he let out a long, slow exhale through his nose and sat down beside her. You own 61% of the company, he said. Still, the garage hummed with silence. Della didn't blink. You never signed the transfer documents, Noah added, thumbing the edge of the file. They were drafted, not filed. I let them run it, she said quietly. I thought Blake needed to prove himself. I thought if I hovered, I'd stunt him. So I backed off. Noah gave a half laugh that wasn't unkind. You backed off without securing protections? I trusted my son, she said, not the same as trusting my instincts. Outside, a leaf blower started up down the street. Morning in the suburbs, domestic, uneventful. But inside this garage, there was nothing mundane about the moment. Noah tapped the folder. This override clause, you ever use it? Not once. Well, he said, rising and dusting off his hands, this might be the last time you'll get to. A car pulled up in the driveway, the unmistakable rumble of Shay's Challenger. Della watched as the tall, sharp-eyed attorney stepped out in a crisp navy suit, coffee in one hand, leather laptop bag in the other. He nodded to her like a surgeon arriving at a planned incision. Morning, Shay said, stepping into the garage. Della raised an eyebrow. You're early. Shay smiled. Just a little. You called. I don't sleep through those. Noah handed him the folder. Shay flipped through the papers with clinical speed, like he already knew what he'd find but wanted confirmation. Initial allocations. Original signatory. Dormant override clause. Valid under Delaware statute, with 10-day notice period for board intervention. He looked up. If you moved today, you could recall the board by Friday. Della looked down at her coffee. The mug was chipped, familiar, solid. All this time, she said slowly, they've been operating under the illusion that I handed them the keys. You didn't, Shay replied. You let them borrow the car. Noah chuckled from the corner. And now they're about to find out who's still on the title. The garage door was open just a crack, and morning light spilled in like a stage cue. The moment stretched between them, dense with possibility. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was a shift in posture, the first inhale before the strike. Della stood, straightened her coat, smoothed her scarf. Shay, she said, draw up the notice. Clean. Quiet. Use the override clause to trigger emergency reevaluation. Cite irregular board conduct, conflict of interest, and fiscal irresponsibility tied to discretionary fund access. You're not going public? Shay asked, eyebrow raised. Not yet, she said. Let's set the table properly. Shay nodded. Consider it done. Noah moved beside her, arms folded. You sure you want to go down this road, Del? She looked at him, really looked at him. They invited me to a dinner they thought I'd pay for and then leave quietly. I don't do quiet exits, Noah. I never have. He nodded, lips tight with something like admiration. You know this means war. Della's eyes flicked toward the driveway, where the sun caught the chrome lettering on Shay's license plate, F1RM. It means justice, she said. And maybe a little blood on the linen. They stepped out into the morning, the smell of cut grass sharp in the air. She wasn't walking like someone who'd been cast aside. She was walking like someone stepping back into power. Behind her, Shay was already dialing his office. And inside Noah's garage, the folder sat open, proof of a history they'd all ignored until now. The boardroom smelled like lemon polish and fresh ink, too clean, too calm for what was coming. 6 leather chairs circled the long walnut table, each positioned like chess pieces in mid-game. At the head sat Della, posture immaculate, eyes unreadable behind soft gold-rimmed glasses. A thick binder lay closed in front of her. Noah stood quietly near the credenza, arms crossed, saying nothing. Gavin had arrived first, head down, suit a little rumpled, like he'd sprinted from guilt to hesitation and hadn't ironed either out. He hadn't touched the bottle of water in front of him. 2 cousins, Kendall and Theo, tapped at their phones until Della asked them to silence them with one polite look. They obeyed without a word. Then the glass doors swung open. Blake and Tamron walked in laughing, late, loud, entirely unaware of what they were walking into. Blake wore confidence like cologne. Tamron had on heels that clicked like punctuation. Together, they looked like a promotional photo for a tech couple who had inherited taste. Sorry, traffic, Blake said, brushing a fleck off his blazer. You know how Midtown gets. Tamron smiled at Della. Morning, or is it still technically Madam Chair? She laughed at her own joke. No one else did. Blake slid into the seat across from Della. So what's this about? Emergency board meeting with no agenda? That's a little cloak and dagger, even for you. Della folded her hands. We'll get right to it. She opened the binder. Inside was a series of crisp, tabbed documents, each one with her original signature, notarized and time-stamped. The room shifted. Blake leaned forward. Gavin sat up straighter. Tamron's smile twitched at the corners. These are the active trust documents, Della said. Filed, legal, binding. They establish and reaffirm full controlling interest. Held solely by me, Blake blinked. That can't be right. That has to be out of date. Shay, who had entered silently and taken a seat near the side wall, spoke without looking up from his tablet. It isn't. You've been operating under courtesy, not contract. The silence hit like a dropped gavel. Tamron's eyes narrowed. Are you serious? You called a board meeting to publicly undermine your own son? Della looked directly at her. I called a meeting to clarify the structure, since the last few gatherings seemed to forget it. You're sabotaging your own children, Tamron snapped. This is humiliation, not governance. Sabotage, Della repeated, voice even. Is that what it felt like at the steakhouse, when you mocked me at a table I paid for? Tamron flushed. Blake held up a hand, jaw tight. Okay, let's not make this personal. It already is, Della said. You stood in front of our family and told them you'd taken the torch. But I never passed it. Gavin finally spoke. So what happens now? Della turned to Shay, who slid a new folder toward the center of the table. A motion for temporary suspension of executive authority pending board vote. Per Clause 7C, under the override. Blake's voice was low. You're voting me out. No, Della said. I'm offering a vote of realignment. Based on performance, not inheritance. Blake laughed, cold and brittle. This is insane. Kendall cleared her throat. Actually, it's legal. I looked over the trust language. She never ceded control. Blake turned to Gavin. You're okay with this? Gavin didn't answer, but his silence said more than a paragraph could. Tamron folded her arms. You want to run it again? At your age? You think the market wants nostalgia? No, Della said, calm and quiet as snowfall. I think the market wants leadership that doesn't confuse ambition with entitlement. Noah's lips twitched into the ghost of a grin. The vote was scheduled. 2 days, confidential, binding. As the meeting adjourned, Blake stood slowly. His face was pale, all the color gone from that practiced smile. You're not just burning the bridge, Mom, he said. You're nuking the whole town. Della gathered her binder without looking at him. Then you should have built more than one road. As they filed out, Shay leaned toward her. You ready for the press, if this leaks early? Della smoothed her blazer, eyes sharp. Let it, she said. Then she walked out of the room, leaving behind a silence no one dared fill. Rain tapped the windows like a slow metronome, steady, measured, inevitable. Inside the conference room, Della stood at the head of the table again. Her navy suit was darker than usual, collar sharp, sleeves cuffed just enough to show the watch Blake had given her 3 years ago for Mother's Day. It ticked loudly now, like it wanted to be part of the conversation. I'm calling this meeting to order, she said. Per Clause 7C of the Corporate Trust Charter, I am initiating a formal vote to restructure executive leadership. Blake leaned forward in his chair, disbelief settling into the lines around his mouth. This isn't how it works. You can't just call a vote. There's a 10-day buffer on major leadership changes. Shay, seated at Della's right, didn't even look up from his notes. That's under standard protocol. You're under an override clause now, activated by majority controlling interest and board quorum. The window compresses to 48 hours. We're within it. Blake's lips parted slightly, like a man mid-sneeze who'd realized too late it was a punch coming. You're railroading this, he muttered. Della raised an eyebrow. I'm correcting it. Tamron crossed her arms beside him. Her silence was barbed, calculating. Gavin sat 2 chairs down, eyes on the polished wood of the table. He hadn't looked at anyone since walking in, not even Blake. We'll begin the vote, Della said, unfolding a single sheet of paper and placing it on the table like a loaded weapon. Item 1. Motion to recall Blake Adler from the role of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Item 2. Motion to name Della Adler as interim chair and acting CEO, pending strategic reassessment. The room stilled. Even the HVAC seemed to pause. Voting members, raise your hand to approve, Shay said, his tone clipped but clear. Kendall was the first. Hand up. No hesitation. Then Theo. Silent. Firm. Della didn't move. Her hand stayed resting over the paper, steady as stone. Blake turned to Gavin. Seriously? Come on, man. You're gonna let her do this? After everything? Everyone turned to Gavin. He was quiet for a moment, not out of confusion, out of clarity so sharp it hurt. Then slowly, Gavin raised his hand. Blake recoiled. You've got to be kidding me. Gavin finally looked at him. I was with you, Blake, until you stopped being with the company. You turned it into a mirror, not a mission. That's not leadership. A silence swallowed the table. Della stood last. I vote yes. The motion passed. Unanimous. Blake slumped back in his chair, the weight of it landing all at once. So that's it? You just take it back? I never gave it away, Della said. I stepped aside. There's a difference. Tamron stood up, fast. This is delusional, she snapped. You're running a vanity project. A nostalgia tour for a woman who can't let go. Della met her eyes calmly. You're confusing ego with memory. I remember what this company is, and I remember what it was built for. That's not nostalgia. That's stewardship. Tamron scoffed and stormed out, heels stabbing the carpet like exclamation points. Blake didn't move. He looked at nothing, just stared at the center of the table like it might blink back at him. Della stepped forward, gathered the papers, and tapped them into alignment. I paid for your dinner, she said softly. I pay for the lights. Then she looked at him. No anger, no pity. Now I'm paying attention. She turned toward the door. Shay followed. Noah nodded once, lingering just long enough for Blake to feel it. The door clicked shut behind them. Blake remained alone at the table, surrounded by the echo of everything he thought he owned. The banker looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He adjusted his tie for the 4th time, eyes darting between Shay's briefcase and the screen in front of him. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the private banking suite, the skyline gleamed, sleek, expensive, unaware. Shay leaned forward slightly, calm, surgical. I'd like to see the most recent permissions on the Adler Holdings operating accounts, please. Both primary and secondary controls. The banker swallowed. Of course, just give me a moment. His fingers tapped at the keyboard. A few awkward beats of silence later, he turned the screen around just far enough for Shay to see it. Shay barely looked. As of last week, Blake Adler attempted to list himself as the sole account manager across all family-linked operating accounts. Correct? The banker gave a tight nod. That's accurate, but those changes were pending verification. They won't be verified, Shay said, sliding a document across the table. Per the active trust. Controlling interest resides exclusively with Della Adler. Any attempts to alter account permissions without her approval are null. Here's the override. You'll see the clause tied directly to corporate liquidity control. The banker hesitated. Shay tilted his head. Do we need a court order? I can have one couriered by noon. No, this is fine, the banker said quickly, taking the paperwork. I'll remove Mr. Adler's administrative access immediately. A beat passed. Shay didn't smile, but his voice softened just enough to imply he could have. Good decision. He waited, watched the access privileges update in real time, then pulled a second folder from his briefcase and laid it flat on the table. Della's signature was already in blue ink, clean and final. This is an updated internal policy from Chair Adler, effective immediately. All outgoing transfers or expenses exceeding $10,000 will require dual authorization. CFO and Chair, meaning her. Every dollar moves with her consent now. The banker glanced up. That'll cover everything. Payroll, discretionary funds, acquisitions? Everything, Shay said. And I'd advise a discreet memo to your compliance team. You don't want to be on the wrong side of this one. The banker nodded, already typing. The meeting was over in minutes. As Shay left the building, the weight of his leather case felt just a little lighter. He didn't like battles, but he was very good at ending them. Back at Della's townhouse, the fireplace crackled. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air still carried the scent of something turned over, wet earth, disturbed roots. Noah stood near the window, sipping from a chipped mug. You built the vault, he said, watching Shay shrug off his coat. They were decorating the lobby. Della didn't look up from her desk. I let them feel in charge for too long. They mistook comfort for control. She finished signing a stack of internal policy letters. Each one bore her initials in deliberate strokes. Shay stepped forward. Bank access is locked down. Blake's changes were reversed. He'll find out when his next discretionary wire bounces. Let it bounce, Della said. Let him feel what it's like to live on assumptions. Noah chuckled. He'll scream. Tamron will spin it. I'm counting on both, she said. Shay set down the revised policy folder on her desk. Also, updated board communication guidelines. Anything financial routes through Gavin or me. Good, Della said. Almost on cue, there was a soft knock at the door. Gavin stood in the doorway, hair damp from the rain, hands in the pockets of his coat like a boy at the principal's office. Got a minute? He asked. Della nodded once. Shay and Noah took the cue and slipped out of the room, quiet as a curtain falling. Gavin stepped in but didn't sit. He looked at the fire, then at her. I just wanted to say thank you, Della studied him. For what? For not holding my silence against me. Back there, at the vote, I froze until the last second. No, she said gently. You waited. There's a difference. He nodded, eyes flicking to the binder on her desk. Blake's going to come hard. I know, she said. That's why I'm already harder. Gavin smiled, just a little. So what happens now? Della leaned back in her chair. The fire reflected in her glasses. Now, she said. We make it impossible for them to walk back through a door they never built. The clock ticked softly behind her. Her watch still ticked louder. The challenge arrived on embossed letterhead. 3 pages of carefully worded accusations disguised as concerns. Fiduciary ambiguity, historic overreach, potential procedural breach of succession norms. Shay read the letter once, then again, slower. When he finished, he set it down and reached for the black binder beside him. They'd expected smoke. What they got was a firewall. It took him 2 hours to compile the full response. 14 years of clean documentation, every audit passed, every fiduciary review certified, every board resolution double-logged and time-stamped. No fraud, no forfeiture, no mismanagement. Just a woman who had quietly run an empire with the precision of a surgeon and the memory of an elephant. He attached the file with a single line. Please see attached documentation, verifying Chair Adler's financial stewardship and legal standing per original trust parameters and Federal Corporate Governance Code. The opposing counsel replied 3 hours later. Upon review of the enclosed documentation, we advise our client to withdraw further inquiry. Translation: Tamron's lawyer saw Shay's name on the header and ran. 2 states away, in a white modern kitchen with too much granite and not enough warmth, Blake stood at the sink clutching his phone like it might offer mercy. Pick up, he muttered. The call went to voicemail. Again, he hit redial. Again. This time, Gavin answered. What do you want? Gavin's voice was tired. Not angry, not cold, just done. She's manipulating you, Blake said. You think this is about the company? It's about her ego. She's pulling strings, and you're letting her. No, Gavin said. She's restoring order, and I'm letting her. Blake scoffed. You think this makes you noble? You're just siding with power. No, Gavin repeated. I'm siding with truth. And then he hung up. At the townhouse, Noah sat on the floor in Della's study, files spread across the rug like pieces of a broken promise. He flipped through the consulting expense logs, clean on the surface, but too symmetrical. Every few weeks, like clockwork, a $3,500 payment. Different vendors, same routing pattern, always coded under external strategy analysis. He adjusted his glasses, pulled one invoice closer. Consulting, he muttered, tracing the signature. Sure. He stood, crossed to Della's desk, and laid the sheet in front of her. $42,000, he said, in undocumented consulting charges. Same fund, different shell vendors, one common denominator. Della looked up. Tamron. Noah nodded. Looks like she was paying ghosts. Shay looked over the sheet, scanned it once, and reached for his phone. No. Della stopped him. We don't call. We don't corner. Shay's eyes flicked to her. Then what? She opened a drawer and pulled out the internal audit protocol. It hadn't been touched in years. Dust along the edge. Original seal still unbroken. She set it flat on the desk and slid it toward him. We audit, top to bottom, quietly, thoroughly. Shay nodded slowly. We'll make this silent, he said, but visible. The kind of visibility that doesn't scream. It whispers, we're watching. The kind that makes people nervous enough to trip over their own guilt. Della stared down at the first page of the protocol. Her thumb rested on the seal. They wanted power without responsibility, she said softly. They thought they could build a legacy on borrowed bricks. Noah raised his mug in a dry toast. And now they're learning what happens when the builder walks back into the room. Della pressed her thumb into the seal and broke it open. The audit had begun. And somewhere, deep in the accounts they thought no one would ever check, a crack had formed. Small, but growing. The card declined mid-sentence. Blake had been halfway through describing a targeted growth partnership over pan-seared scallops and a $52 Syrah when the waiter returned. Polite, apologetic, and holding the black leather check presenter like it was radioactive. I'm sorry, Mr. Adler, the waiter said. Quiet enough to embarrass, but not enough to spare. Blake blinked. Run it again. The waiter hesitated. I did. Twice. The supplier across from him, a seasoned logistics exec with a Texas drawl and too many deal scars, raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? Blake forced a laugh and pulled out his phone. Just a billing glitch. Happens sometimes. He dialed the bank, still smiling. 5 minutes later, sir, I understand your frustration, the banker said, voice tinny and measured through the phone. But as of last week, high-limit transactions now require secondary verification. Blake gripped the phone harder. I am the verification. I'm afraid not, sir. The account now requires dual approval. You'll need to contact the chair's office. Blake froze. You mean my mother? Yes, Della Adler. She holds final authorization. The line went quiet for a beat. Then, slowly, Blake ended the call. He stared at the table, jaw tightening. Blake? The supplier asked, half concerned, half amused. Blake forced another tight smile. You know how family businesses go. The supplier nodded, but his tone was different now. Cooler, cautious. Back at the townhouse, Della was reviewing invoices when her desk line lit up. Shay glanced at the screen. Blocked number, guess who? She tapped the receiver. Della Adler. What the hell are you doing? Blake's voice snapped across the line like a whip. You embarrassed me, in front of a supplier. Della didn't blink. Did the scallops not hold up? Don't play cute with me. You asked me to take a back seat, she said calmly. Now you're in the trunk. He exhaled hard. You're using this to punish me. No, she said. I'm using this to protect the company. Your embarrassment? That's just an unfortunate side effect. He hung up. She replaced the receiver without emotion. Shay, please flag all travel expenses. I want to see who's flying, where, and how often. Shay nodded. Already on it. An hour later, her personal line rang. A voice she hadn't expected. Della, it's Mark Sweeney, Arlington Freight. I was just with Blake. Della stood. Mark, hello. I didn't mean to step into family matters, he said carefully, but I wanted you to know. I'd prefer to deal with whoever's actually steering the ship. I've worked with too many sons who treat the deck like a lounge chair. Della smiled into the phone. Then welcome to the bridge, Mark. They ended the call with mutual understanding. The kind that came from shared years, not shared blood. Downstairs, in the warehouse, Gavin rolled up his sleeves. Pallets lined the concrete walls, some labeled wrong, others not labeled at all. Half the barcode scanners were dead. It was a small disaster in the shape of disorganization. He wasn't loud about it. Didn't announce a new plan. Just started fixing things. Quietly. He resorted SKUs, color-coded product categories, installed new shelf trackers with his own money. He moved like someone reclaiming something, not power, purpose. One of the junior staff, a kid named Luis, walked by. Didn't know the CFO got his hands dirty. Gavin smiled. When you want something clean, you start with your hands. Luis nodded like he'd remember that. Online, meanwhile, Tamron sat on the edge of a marble bathtub. Fingers poised above her phone screen, the glow lighting her perfectly contoured face. Her post was already drafted. Some betrayals are loud. Others are quiet enough to smile in your face. Lesson learned. She tapped post and set the phone down, staring at the bath she hadn't run and the silence she hadn't earned. The likes started rolling in, sympathy from strangers, validation from curated acquaintances, but none from Blake. Back in Della's office, Noah walked in with a fresh folder and a knowing look. They're bleeding trust, he said. First the card, now the contracts. Next? Perception, Della replied, taking the folder. You going public? He asked. Not yet. She opened the folder. Inside, 3 more flagged payments. All recent. All just under $10K. She looked up. Shay, she said, her voice low and cold. Start building the case, quietly. I want it airtight before the next board meeting. Shay nodded. Got it. Noah sat across from her, brow furrowed. You think she's going to fold? Della closed the folder. No. She looked out the window, where dust crept along the skyline like a warning. I think she's going to burn. The magazine hit desks Tuesday morning, matte cover, white text, minimalist design. But the headline didn't need flair. The woman who rebuilt the house she built. Inside, a 2-page spread. Della in a dark blazer, arms crossed, backlit by soft amber tones. No filters, no soft focus. Just power, rendered clean. She hadn't wanted to do it. But Shay had made the case, quietly, as always. Narrative wins when perception wavers, he'd said. They're bleeding credibility. You're gaining gravity, so she'd said yes. The journalist had asked good questions, direct ones, not the kind that danced. What does legacy mean? Why now? What made you return? And she'd answered plainly. This company has my name. It has my husband's soul. It has my son's fingerprints. But it has my blood. She'd named Gavin in the acknowledgments, credited him for stabilizing operations, tightening inventory, and returning the heartbeat to the floor. She'd referenced her late husband, called him the compass, said his absence made her sharper, not colder. There was no mention of Blake, none of Tamron, not a footnote, not a quote, not a memory. And that silence was louder than ink. Gavin's quote came near the close. set off in bold. She saved the company twice. They just noticed this time. He hadn't told her he'd said it, but when she saw it, she felt something in her chest settle. Not pride, not satisfaction, just confirmation. Like she wasn't crazy for remembering the storm, while others romanticized the calm. Blake read the article standing in the center of his living room, still in yesterday's clothes, phone in hand, rage curling at the edges of his mouth. He called the journalist. It rang once, then voicemail. He tried again, left a message this time. "Hi, this is Blake Adler. I noticed I wasn't quoted in your piece. I'd like to provide some additional context." He waited. An hour, then 2. At 3:42 p.m., he got a text. "We've reviewed and finalized the piece. No amendments planned. Thank you for reaching out." He read it twice, threw the phone across the room. At the office, the glass doors to Della's floor opened sharply. Tamron walked in like a legal brief, precise, dressed to intimidate, eyes sharp with fury that had been slow cooking for weeks. Shay clocked her arrival from the hallway. "Want me in the room?" he asked. Della shook her head. "Let her try." Tamron entered without knocking. She didn't sit. "You omitted us," she said. Her voice didn't crack, but her hands stayed clenched at her sides. Della didn't look up from the folder she was reading. "I named the people who earned mention. We built the brand alongside you." "You wore it like jewelry," Della said calmly. "That's not the same." Tamron stepped forward. "You gave us everything, then used it against us." Della finally looked at her. "No," she said. "I gave you everything, and you used it against me. I'm just taking the microphone back." Tamron laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think the board will stand for this level of personal spite?" "This isn't spite," Della said. "It's clarity." And they already stood. Tamron didn't flinch, but she blinked, fast. "You don't get to rewrite history," she said. Della stood. Slowly. "I'm not rewriting it. I lived it. You just posted about it." Tamron opened her mouth, then closed it. She turned, heels tapping sharp and uneven on the marble floor as she left. Outside the office, Shay leaned against the wall, unreadable. Tamron passed him without a word. "Everything okay in there?" he asked, once the echo of her heels had faded. Della returned to her seat, smoothed the hem of her jacket. "No," she said. Then, "Everything's in motion." Later that evening, the article was already trending. The headline clipped and reposted. Her quote about bloodline versus lifeline had gone semi-viral. Della sat by the fireplace, glass of water in hand. Not wine, never wine. Just the quiet kind of celebration. Noah came in with a stack of flagged emails. "You're getting offers, speaking engagements, panel spots." "I'm not looking to be a figurehead," she said. "Then why agree to the piece?" She sipped her water. "Because silence started to look like complicity." He handed her the last folder. "Audit's almost complete. The paper trail on Tamron is more than smoke now." Della took the file. Didn't open it. Not yet. "Let it breathe a little longer," she said. "The worst thing you can do to people who lie for a living is make them sit in the truth." Noah nodded. Outside, lightning stitched the sky without sound. The lake was glass that afternoon, still, unbothered. The kind of quiet that looked innocent until you realized it was watching everything. Della stepped out of her car in low heels and a slate gray coat, one button fastened. Her hair pulled back, not severe, precise. The gravel crunched underfoot as she walked up the flagstone path to her lake house. Through the wide living room windows, she could see them, Blake in chinos and bare feet, holding court with a group of venture-fueled egos. Tamron perched on the arm of a leather chair, drink in hand, laughing too hard at something someone said. A banner hung across the fireplace mantel. Founders Weekend. She didn't knock. She walked in. The conversation faltered immediately. A few guests stood, out of reflex more than respect. Blake's voice broke the silence. "Mom." Tamron stood quickly, already on alert. "Is something wrong?" Della looked around. She took her time. Someone had replaced the framed photo of her late husband above the fireplace with an abstract canvas in beige and gold. The old clock was gone. The scent of lemonwood and tobacco replaced with overpriced candles that didn't smell like anything real. "What is this?" she asked. Blake forced a chuckle. It's just a networking retreat. Thought it was time to make better use of the space. Tamron stepped forward, softening her tone. The property wasn't being used, Della. We're reimagining it as a legacy brand platform. Della raised an eyebrow. And did you get permission from the owner? Blake frowned. We assumed. Don't. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded document, crisp and creased once. She laid it on the coffee table. The deed. Her name at the top. Her late husband's signature. No transfer. No trust. No retitle. This house, she said, looking directly at Blake, was never yours to claim. And certainly not to rent out to hedge fund hobbyists looking for a tax write-off and a curated photo op. One of the guests stood awkwardly. Should we? Yes, Shay said, appearing behind her like punctuation. You absolutely should, Tamron stepped forward, indignant. You can't be serious. Della turned slowly. I am. This is a formal 24-hour notice to vacate. Enforced. Filed. Delivered. Blake moved forward, incredulous. You're evicting us? No, Della said. I'm restoring the house to its rightful use, which is not being monetized into someone's lifestyle branding campaign. Tamron's jaw clenched. You're doing this to embarrass us. Embarrassment, Shay said, is usually a byproduct of assuming you're entitled to what you haven't earned. One of the guests was already gathering his bag, mumbling something about needing to catch a flight. Another followed. The room thinned quickly. Blake looked helpless. We just wanted to preserve something meaningful. You wanted to repurpose it, Della said, like you tried to do with the company and me. The silence that followed wasn't stunned. It was exposed. Later that evening, the fire was lit again. Real logs, real crackle. Della sat on the old tartan throw that had lived there since before Blake was born. Gavin stood beside a half-filled box labeled office. This is weird, he said. She didn't look up. Why? Because it feels like a win, and it shouldn't. She set down her tea. That's because you're a good man. Good men don't enjoy necessary things. They endure them. Gavin gave a small smile and taped the box shut. Want help with the upstairs? He asked. She nodded. Start with the closet. Anything monogrammed, toss it. Anything sentimental, keep it. Anything labeled strategic partnerships, burn it. He laughed and walked off. In the living room, Shay stood at the window, watching the guests pull out in black SUVs, engines low and embarrassed. You know, he said, this wasn't really about property. No, Della replied. He turned to her. It was about precedent. She looked at the deed again, folded it back into her coat. Shay smiled faintly. Sometimes revenge is just maintenance. Della stood, smoothing her coat. And sometimes, maintenance is how you keep a legacy clean. The wind shifted outside, curling through the trees like a whisper with teeth. Blake and Tamron were gone, but the house was home again. The boardroom was quiet when Della slid the folder across the table. Cream-colored, unmarked. Heavy in a way that paper usually isn't, because weight, real weight, lives in consequences. Updated bylaws, she said. Gavin leaned forward first. Shay already knew. They'd drafted the revisions together over the course of a weekend, using black coffee and red ink like ritual tools. Noah was there too, quiet at her right. Inside the folder, a line struck through in thick black. Clause 4C. All immediate family members of the founders shall be eligible for advisory or leadership roles without performance vetting, as determined by majority legacy vote. Gone, burned, replaced with all board roles, advisory positions, and grant allocations shall be reviewed biannually, merit-based, and subject to performance evaluation overseen by external fiduciary counsel. It wasn't revenge, it was policy. And once it was policy, it couldn't be debated, it could only be obeyed. By Wednesday, Tamron's name had been removed from the Adler Foundation's grant advisory panel. The webpage just updated. No explanation, no fanfare. Her Emerging Voices initiative had already been under review. The minutes from the last session were now public. 3 members had voted to suspend it. 2 had cited budget opacity. She'd never see it coming, which made it cleaner. Blake's cousin Theo had never spoken much in board meetings, but he'd always shown up early, asked quiet questions. ran his own spreadsheets on the company's back end just to understand the baseline. Now he sat at the table, promoted to director of forecasting. Gavin announced it without ceremony. He's been doing the work. He deserves the title. Della didn't speak, just nodded once. Theo looked stunned, but ready. Thank you, he said quietly. I won't waste it. You already didn't, Gavin replied. That night, the company's community inbox overflowed. Former vendors, warehouse supervisors, a woman named Estelle, who'd sewn packaging by hand in the early days. They weren't just congratulating her, they were remembering her. Your name used to mean something steady. It does again. About damn time the founder ran the foundation. I remember you showing up in the pouring rain to walk the shipping line. You didn't have to. But you did. In the office kitchen the next day, Gavin poured coffee, sleeves rolled. He looked around. The subtle changes were everywhere now. The quiet hum of efficiency returning. No one walking on eggshells. No more Tamron emails at midnight with brand realignment subject lines. No more Blake dropping by with vague ideas and big hand gestures. Just people doing the work. Della stepped in, phone tucked under her arm, scanning through a memo. He passed her a mug. It's like you never left. She took it, smiled. That's the trick, she said. I never did. I just stopped being loud about it. He leaned against the counter. You think they'll fight back? She sipped. They'll flail, but no, they won't fight. Why not? Because the bylaws weren't just their privilege, she said, glancing at the folder in her hand. They were their illusion. Now they're just paper. Shay walked in just then, sliding his phone across the counter toward her. You'll want to see this. It was an email. Subject: urgent. Proposed motion from Tamron Adler Della. Scrolled once, then twice, then stopped. Motion: reinstatement of legacy influence clause for founding family members, submitted to. Board chair endorsements, pending status, rejected. Fails compliance under newly ratified bylaws. Clause 4D. At the bottom, a single line in red. Filed and closed. Timestamp: 4:12 a.m. She handed the phone back to Shay. She's playing checkers, she murmured. And the board's not a picnic table anymore. Shay grinned. We could have added fireworks. No, Della said. The silence is louder. Outside, the wind had picked up. But for once, the building felt warm. Stable. Theirs. The envelope was Creamstock. No return address. Just Della in Blake's handwriting, slightly rushed, as if his guilt hadn't quite steadied his hand. No courier, no text. Someone had left it with the front desk receptionist at the office, polite, but tight-lipped. Shay found it in the mail pile that afternoon. He placed it on her desk without comment, just a raised brow and a post-it. You'll know what to do. She read it standing. The paper was smooth, too smooth. You made your point. Can we at least have a place at the table again? Blake, no apology, no accountability. Just an appeal wrapped in diplomacy. A place at the table, as if it had been stolen rather than inherited and squandered. Della folded the letter once, then once more. She didn't sigh, didn't speak. That night she lit the fireplace herself. The flame caught easily. Paper burns fast when it carries no weight. She dropped the folded note into the fire, watched the edges curl like old lies giving up. She didn't even warm her hands. By Friday, Shay had finalized the documents for the Adler Resilience Grant, a new initiative built for workers, not founders. Annual, competitive, rooted in performance, not last names. Named after no one obvious, but signed under Gavin Adler, Director of Impact and Community Strategy. The office hadn't announced it yet, but internally it moved fast, clean, without friction. Shay handed Gavin the final signed copies as they stood in the glass conference room, sunlight spilling in like approval. Gavin blinked. Why me? You've already been doing it, Shay said. Now it just has your name. Gavin looked through the packet, then toward the warehouse floor below. He could already hear chairs scraping, tables being unfolded, the hum of real things about to happen. Saturday morning, the first community breakfast in 3 years. Plastic tablecloths, fold-out chairs, coffee in thermoses brought from home, pancakes, bulk fruit trays, smiles that hadn't seen this room in too long. Warehouse workers brought their kids. Local nonprofit heads showed up uninvited and pitched in. No stage, no speeches, just Gavin, sleeves rolled, handing out flyers and name tags, joking with vendors, elbow deep in setup. He looked right, not polished, not branded, just there, present. Upstairs, on the old catwalk that overlooked the warehouse floor, Della stood with her coffee and clipboard. She didn't wave, didn't descend the stairs. She watched. From above, she saw movement without chaos, purpose without posturing. It reminded her of the early years, before the conference calls and equity drama, when everything still had weight because everything still had risk. Gavin moved through the room with quiet command, not because he asked for it, but because no one questioned it. She sipped her coffee. Noah stepped beside her, holding his own. "He's good at this," he said, watching the buzz below. "He gets this," she replied. Noah nodded. "You finally handed it down." Della didn't respond immediately. Then, "Not down, through." Noah raised an eyebrow. "That's different." "It matters," she said. "Down implies hierarchy. Through implies trust." He smiled. Big difference from the woman who used to rewrite the welcome speeches 5 minutes before the event. She chuckled softly. She needed control. This one needs continuity. Below them, someone handed Gavin a mic for announcements. He shook his head, smiled, and passed it to a junior staffer who'd been volunteering extra hours all week. Della nodded to herself. That's the legacy, not the fire, the foundation. Back in her office that evening, a new envelope sat on her desk. No name on the front, no address. Just one line, typed this time. "Then what do we do now?" "Tea." She looked at it. For a long moment, she didn't open it. Not yet. She reached for a red pen and circled a line on the latest audit report. Because some things still needed cleaning. And the next move was hers. The chandeliers sparkled like the company had never known fire. They hung above the ballroom like old promises, polished, suspended, and suddenly fulfilled. The Adler Centennial Gala had once been conceived as a corporate love letter to itself, branding, legacy, and legacy branding. Tamron had written the original event deck 2 years ago, complete with gold-accented menus and a curated intergenerational spotlight experience. She hadn't expected to watch it from the wings, but now she stood there, still styled, still poised, tucked beneath the sconce lighting near the wall, Blake beside her, both dressed for an event that no longer included them. They hadn't been listed on the program, hadn't been given a table, hadn't even been emailed. Just allowed in the room. That was the compromise. Della entered through the central doors, escorted by Shay and Theo. The applause came before she reached the carpeted stairs. Not polite, not forced, but full. It rippled from the front tables backward. Real recognition. The kind that says, "We remember who built this." She was seated front row, center, not elevated. Just anchored. Like a cornerstone. Gavin took the stage a few minutes later. No podium, no teleprompter. Just a cordless mic and steady posture. "Welcome," he said, voice clear over the hushed crowd. "Tonight we celebrate not just survival, not just success, but stewardship. We're here because someone decided this company wasn't finished. Not just years ago, but months ago, and again, just weeks ago." Murmurs of agreement. Laughter in the right places. A smattering of applause as former staffers and long-tenured vendors came up one by one. Brief stories, small acknowledgments. A woman named Carla talked about how Della once sat with her in the break room the day after Carla's husband died. A vendor told a story about Della pulling him out of a failing deal because she read people better than he read spreadsheets. Every story was personal, small, true. They didn't teach them in branding meetings. They lived in people. From the side wall, Blake stood rigid. Tamron's fingers were laced tightly around a champagne flute she hadn't sipped from. When Della's name came up again, and again, neither of them flinched anymore. They just looked forward, until the slideshow started. Photos played over a soft jazz instrumental, not stock images, real ones, archival, pulled from warehouse holiday parties, groundbreakings, that one soggy company retreat in Maine, where Della showed up in boots and led the team-building exercises herself. She was in almost all of them. Gavin was in many. Theo, Shay, warehouse crews, department heads. But not Blake, and not Tamron. Not one image, not one laugh, not one toast. They hadn't been erased, they just hadn't mattered enough to include. At the close of the program, Gavin returned to the center. "One last thing," he said. "We asked her to say a few words. She refused at first. Then she agreed, but only if she could say exactly 6. Laughter again, soft, knowing. Gavin looked toward her. "Mom?" Della stood slowly. No notes, no fanfare. She raised a glass of water, not wine, and turned to the crowd. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing the truth." The room rose before the last syllable left her lips, a standing ovation that didn't explode. It deepened. Not loud, heavy, earned. From the side wall, Blake didn't move. Tamron blinked hard, once. Della sat again without looking their way. The lights dimmed. But the room stayed bright. "She's not in control," Gavin said, setting his mug down. "She's in her seat." The boardroom was quiet, comfortable. Theo nodded across the table. Shay was typing, silently tracking edits to the charter draft in real time. The line they were working on was highlighted in gold. Clause 1B. All future board placements shall be merit-based. Family name does not constitute qualification. Legacy is not title. Gavin leaned back in the chair, Della's chair, technically, but she hadn't sat in it since the gala. She was upstairs now, not retired, not absent, just higher up. Watching, trusting. The new operations structure put Gavin in charge of day-to-day strategy and internal culture. Della kept the final vote. Nothing moved without her hand, but not everything required it anymore. The first tabloid headline came from a tech gossip blog no one took seriously. Blake Adler plus Tamron rebrand as founders of new lifestyle venture, Meet Lineage. Below it, staged photos, reclaimed wood desks, minimalist logos, shots of them barefoot on a wraparound porch that wasn't theirs. Their pitch was a vague alchemy of sustainability, generational grit, and narrative-first commerce. No one bit. The deck leaked. Investors laughed in private. One VC passed on the deal with a 6-word response. "Looks like a trust fund tantrum." They'd tried to pivot. They'd tried to repackage. But legacy, they were learning, doesn't transfer like a logo. Back at headquarters, Gavin watched Shay finalize the updated company charter. The last clause added was simple, brutal, and irreversible. No future board or executive leadership role may be granted based solely on surname or marital tie. All placements require a 2.1 performance review threshold. It didn't say Blake's name. It didn't have to. Della's office had changed. The sharp edges had softened. Less strategy, more memory. Framed photos of the original team lined the walls. Not portraits, candids. A shot of Carla in the warehouse break room. Theo in his first week. Gavin half asleep with a clipboard in hand. No picture of Blake. Tamron's name never came up. The only thing still left to finish was the letter. She wrote it slowly, with a fountain pen. By hand first, before Shay would digitize it and release it at quarter close. It began like all of them had. To our partners, customers, and family of workers. But the tone shifted after the second paragraph. It moved from balance sheets to backbone, from projections to protection. She didn't name anyone, but she thanked the people who stayed. And she defined the word legacy like a woman finally done apologizing for surviving her own story. Legacy isn't inheritance, it's debt paid forward. And from this moment on, our debt is to the future, not the past. Somewhere in a rental workspace in Austin, Blake stared at the article announcing the charter change. He read it 3 times, said nothing. Tamron sat across from him, scrolling. "They made it law," she said, voice flat. "We can't even claim being mistreated anymore." He didn't answer. A rejection email lit up on his phone. Subject: Lineage proposal declined. Reason: incomplete vision. Redundant market position. No founder credibility. He shut off the screen. Tamron looked up. "We could pivot." He shook his head. "No." Back in the office, Della walked the length of the empty executive floor. Her heels softer now, her steps slower. She paused at the end of the hall, where the old mission statement was etched into frosted glass. Build what outlasts you, she smiled. Not wistfully, not bitterly, just with the clarity of someone who had finally learned how to hold a legacy without clutching it. Behind her, Gavin called out from the stairwell. You coming down? In a minute, she said. Then she turned and walked back to her desk, not to work, to sign the letter, the one that said goodbye without ever using the word. The new boardroom table arrived on a rainy Monday, 10 feet long, solid walnut, handcrafted by a local artisan whose grandfather had worked in the Adler shipping docks in the 1960s. It wasn't sleek, it was sturdy. The finish still smelled like oil and smoke. The grain ran like veins. Along the center, engraved in precise brass inlay, were the initials of every leader who had served the company and left it stronger. Her husband's initials, MHA, sat at one end. Hers, DEA, anchored the middle. Gavin's had been added last, GJA, not because of blood, but because of work. The table had no head, no throne, just balance. Shay had watched the delivery crew in silence. When they stepped back, reverent, he finally spoke. We don't have to tell them what it means. They'll know, Della said. She touched the edge once, just once. 2 days later, the old boardroom chair, the one Blake had sat in during every overconfident pitch and dismissive nod, was wheeled into storage, not replaced, removed. No one sits here until someone serves here, Della had told facilities. It wasn't punitive, it was precedent. The new wall art wasn't glossy. Gone were the portraits of founders framed in gold leaf, all chin angles and blurred backgrounds. In their place, framed letters, product photos, and handwritten notes from the people who had built the brand without ever being tagged in a press release. A letter from a single mom in Des Moines. Your team helped me stay afloat when my paycheck missed. I didn't forget that. A Polaroid of a 1998 Christmas party in the warehouse. The team in paper hats. Della holding a toddler on her hip. A photo of Carla and her late husband, their anniversary cake sitting atop an Adler freight box. History, yes, but not the curated kind. The real kind. The kind that didn't pose. That Friday, Gavin stood in the new boardroom alone, hands on the table's smooth edge. Della walked in behind him. He didn't turn. You ever think it'd look like this? She stepped beside him. No, I didn't think I'd still be here to see it. He gestured to the brass inlay. You could have just left plaques, photos, a quote. She shook her head. Quotes don't hold weight. Wood does. He smiled. Still heavy? Intentionally, she said. They both sat side by side. No head chair, no spotlight, just space. She looked around the room. Feels quieter. It's focused, Gavin said. People aren't performing anymore. Della nodded slowly. Good. She traced the table once more, fingers stopping on her husband's initials. This table, she said, is the first one I've commissioned since the original. Gavin leaned back, thoughtful. And this time, she looked at him. This time I knew who it was for. Shay entered moments later, files in hand. All set for quarter close, he said. Letter goes out in an hour. Della nodded. Print a copy for the archive. Gavin glanced toward the empty chair that had once been Blake's. You ever think he'll get it? Della was quiet for a moment. Then, some people think leadership is a crown. But it's not. She tapped the edge of the table gently. It's a seat. She stood, gathering her notes, and looked toward the far wall, where a new plaque had just been mounted. The next seat is earned in service. Gavin read it aloud, then turned to her. Not inheritance? She gave a faint smile. Inheritance is a start, she said. Not a claim. The clock above the door clicked softly. Change doesn't always explode. Sometimes it echoes. The boardroom was empty when she stepped in. No chatter, no screens glowing. Just silence, warmed by late afternoon sun cutting across the long walnut table. The one she'd had built to hold weight. Della walked the perimeter slowly, fingertips trailing the edge like she was closing a book in braille. She'd always entered this room with purpose, with decisions to make, with fires to put out or policies to enforce. But today, for the first time in decades, she wasn't here to lead. She was here to leave. She sat, at the center, not to preside, to reflect. For the first time in years, she chose the chair she wanted. Not because it was at the head, but because it faced the wall of stories. Of names that didn't headline the brand but built it. The kind of history no PR deck ever could. She pulled 2 items from her satchel and laid them side by side on the table. Her original ledger. Spine worn, pages yellowed at the edges. The numbers inside were handwritten, almost naive in their optimism. Gas receipts. A $200 truck rental. The first line of payroll with her and her husband's names at the top. Unpaid. And beside it, the newest company charter, freshly signed, firm-bound. Her initials sealed both. Bookends, outside the glass wall, the company moved. Not with her, around her, exactly as she'd built it to. Staff passed without glancing in. No one hovered, no one whispered. They had no idea she was sitting behind the tinted glass. They were too busy doing the work. One team laughed as they crossed the floor, carrying rolls of mock-up packaging. A young woman in logistics high-fived Theo. Carla walked by with a cup of tea and a clipboard, already onto her next project. Gavin passed through it all with that quiet, unobtrusive stride of someone who never had to demand attention to keep it. He didn't break pace when he saw her, just looked up, met her eyes, nodded once. It was enough. She sat there for another minute, then stood. No speech, no moment, just movement. She took the charter and slid it into her bag. Left the ledger behind. Open, mid-page, payroll entry 0017. Gavin's first week. Then she walked to the door, turned off the light. One last scan of the room, and finally, click. She locked it behind her. That night, she sat by the fire at home. No laptop, no notepad. Just water and the kind of quiet that didn't feel lonely anymore. She reached for the envelope Shay had handed her earlier. Inside, the final print version of her shareholder letter. The last one she would ever write. She didn't need to read it again. She remembered every line. Instead, she turned it over and wrote a single sentence on the back. Not for them, for herself. At a dinner I paid for, they said I should learn to take a back seat. The next morning, I took back every seat at the table. She folded it shut and smiled. Not wistfully, not bitterly, just completely.